Deep in the center of Europe, surrounded by the growing Third Reich and its Axis allies, stood a small nation of mountains that confounded every military mind. While Hitler's troops rolled through Poland in days, took France in weeks, and advanced deep into the Soviet Union, there was one nation, slightly larger than the state of Maryland, unscathed throughout the entire war. This wasn't dumb luck. This wasn't because they were neglected. This was Switzerland, and the reasons Hitler never invaded this small alpine state reveal one of World War II most compelling untold tales of clever diplomacy, strategic genius, and a defense strategy so outrageous it was nearly insane. Imagine Europe in 1940. The war machine of Germany had been unstoppable. Denmark had fallen in hours, Norway in weeks, and Belgium and the Netherlands collapsed within days. France, the supposed military giant of Europe, fell after only 6 weeks of combat. From the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean, from the Atlantic Ocean to the shores of Switzerland, Nazi flags waved over a continent in bondage. But in the very heart of this occupied kingdom, Swiss flags still streamed defiantly in alpine breezes. How did a country with no military tradition, no resources Hitler so urgently required, and no great powers as allies survive when much greater and more powerful nations had succumbed? The explanation starts not in 1939, but hundreds of years ago, in the very fabric of Swiss society. Switzerland had been formally neutral since 1815, following the Congress of Vienna, following Napoleon's defeat. But this was not the passive neutrality of a too-weak nation to take sides. It was an armed neutrality, created by a nation that had learned from hard knowledge that to live in the center of Europe meant both strength to preserve their independence and prudence to eschew unwanted enemies. The Swiss had taken centuries to hone what they referred to as porcupine defense, molding their tiny country so hard and expensive to swallow that even the greediest predator would hesitate. When Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, Swiss military strategists observed with increasing anxiety as their huge neighbor started flexing its muscles. By 1938, with the Anschluss with Austria, Switzerland was surrounded on 3 sides by German land. The handwriting was on the wall, written in Gothic lettering and signed with a swastika. But instead of panicking or yielding to the inevitable, the Swiss started rolling out one of the most creative defense strategies in the history of warfare. Under General Henry Gissen, who would be Switzerland's wartime commander-in-chief, they created what would come to be called the National Redoubt strategy. The strategy was stunning in its boldness and chilling in its potential. If invaded, the Swiss would not defend their borders conventionally. They would withdraw to the most mountainous, defensive areas of the nation and conduct a guerrilla war that might continue for years. All bridges would be blown up, all tunnels brought down, all strategic material taken away or left booby-trapped. The Swiss would make their nation a fortress so strong that it would take huge resources that Germany could not afford to devote to capturing while engaged in a multi-front struggle. It was a game of mutually assured destruction, Swiss style. And the military preparations were merely half the matter. What preserved Switzerland was a complicated matrix of economic, diplomatic, and psychological realities that rendered invasion not only expensive but pointless. Hitler's war machine was fueled by precision timing and economic efficacy. The German economy was already stretched thin, maintaining enormous military operations on several continents. Securing Switzerland would have been a matter of taking hundreds of thousands of men from vital fronts to fight potentially months of harsh mountain battles, all to secure control over a nation whose value was not so much in being conquered as in remaining free. Switzerland had become so vital to Nazi Germany because it had stayed neutral. Swiss banks offered essential financial services that facilitated Germany's international trade even during the war. Swiss factories working under tightly negotiated arrangements made precision tools, machinery, and other products that the German war machine required. Swiss railroads and alpine passes were key transit routes for the movement of goods between Germany and Italy. Most significantly, Switzerland was a neutral meeting place where German officials could have sensitive negotiations with other countries without the issues that would come up on German territory. The economic relationship was a delicate dance of give and take, and blackmail and take. The Swiss exported to Germany, but they also exported to the Allies. They let German trains pass through their territory, but they also passed on information to British agents. They took German gold, some of which was plundered from conquered countries, but they were also a haven for refugees escaping Nazi oppression. It was a delicate balancing act that took exceptional diplomatic prowess, and the Swiss executed it with the tactfulness of their legendary clockmakers. Meanwhile, the military preparations went on in typical Swiss attention to detail. By 1941, almost all adult men in Switzerland had been trained in the military and knew precisely what to do in the event of invasion. Guns were stashed away in mountain redoubts. Deadly explosive charges had been laid beneath each principal bridge, tunnel, and strategic facility, waiting to be triggered at an instant's notice. The Alps themselves were converted into a fortress, gun positions cut into cliff faces, and bunkers filled with provisions for protracted sieges. The Swiss even went as far as to make provision for the reduction of their cities if needed. A scorched earth strategy that would have left the invaders occupying dust. Hitler and his commanders knew all about these preparations, and they greatly complicated any invasion plans. German military analyses determined that to subdue Switzerland would take a minimum of 12 divisions, about 300,000 men, and would last from several months to more than 1 year, depending upon how successfully the Swiss developed their national redoubt strategy. These were troops that Germany could not afford to spare easily, particularly after the invasion of the Soviet Union started devouring massive resources. Each division deployed to engage in combat in the Swiss Alps was a division that could not be utilized in Russia, North Africa, or for defending the Atlantic Wall. Most significant of all, Hitler realized that Switzerland was worth more to Germany as an independent, neutral country than it ever could be as a conquered nation. The Swiss banking system offered services that were vital to German foreign commerce. Swiss plants manufactured high-grade products under contract. Swiss territory offered vital transit routes. Above all, Switzerland functioned as a pressure release valve for German diplomacy, a venue in which delicate negotiations might take place, where informal contacts might be sustained, and where the Reich might deal with the external world without the political inconvenience that would attend to taking such business on German territory. At times, there seemed to be moments when invasion loomed. In 1940, during the German sweep across France, Wehrmacht troops concentrated along the Swiss border, and Hitler instructed Operation Tannenbaum, the invasion of Switzerland, to be prepared. The Swiss picked up German overflight reconnaissance over their own country and troop movements of specialists in mountain fighting to deployment positions along the border. General Gissen called for full mobilization, and for some anxious weeks, it looked as if the Alps themselves would ring with the drums of war. But the attack order was never issued. Hitler had weighed the pros and cons and found that war mathematics spelled best for permitting Switzerland to remain independent. The psychological aspect of Hitler's decision cannot be ignored. The Führer considered himself to be the designer of a new order of Europe, and in his overweening vision, there was a place for each nation. Some would be conquered and incorporated, others made into vassal states, and some others eliminated. But Switzerland held a special place in the new order, not as a conquered state, but as a convenient, neutral state whose independence was in German interests. Hitler, despite all his megalomania, was able to make pragmatic calculations when it was to his advantage, and neutrality for Switzerland was just more convenient than invading it. The longer the war ran, and the more desperate Germany's position became, the greater the temptation to grab the resources of Switzerland. But by then, the military position had declined so catastrophically that Germany no longer had the troops to spare for an invasion to be successful. The National Redoubt plan had succeeded not by discouraging any one breakthrough assault, but by making invasion so expensive that it was always being put off indefinitely until it became impossible. The Swiss had navigated the needle of survival for 6 years of all-out war, preserving their independence through a mix of military readiness, economic usefulness, and diplomatic finesse that few other small countries could have equaled. The tale of Switzerland's survival teaches deep truths about the nature of power, survival, and strategic thinking. At a time when military strength appeared to rule everything, a tiny country survived not because it was the most powerful, but because it was the wisest. They knew that in war, as in life, the porcupine does not survive by vanquishing the wolf, but by making the cost of attack exceed the potential reward. Switzerland's policy contains lessons for all time as to how minor powers may preserve their autonomy in a great power world. Through prudent planning, clever diplomacy, and the willingness to prioritize survival over comfort. What do you think? Might Switzerland's policy be applied today, or was it a result of extraordinary events that cannot be repeated? Let us know in the comments below, and if you like this in-depth look at one of World War II's most intriguing untold histories, be sure to subscribe for additional historical mysteries that upend everything you thought you knew about the past. Ring that notification bell, because next week we are diving into another unbelievable survival tale that will leave your mind boggled by everything you ever learned in history class.